Welcome to the Digital Determinants podcast, where we delve into the complex, systemic reasons behind the presence of digital inequity and the challenges surrounding digital adoption within communities comprising generations from the Great Migration. This podcast will explore the impact of trust on digital participation, the implications of digital discrimination, and the unique challenges faced by descendants of the Great Migration in embracing digital technologies. Join us as we unravel the historical, social, and technological factors contributing to this phenomenon and explore potential solutions to bridge the digital divide and promote inclusive digital adoption. Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Digital Determinants podcast. I am super excited, but I am also a little bit sad because this is the last episode in this series under my Benton Opportunity Fund Fellowship experience. And it's been incredible. I mean, the continuum of learning and emotions and reflection and dialogue I've experienced during this time, the growth. I think a lot of times when you are mid-career or later career, which I consider myself to be later career, I know folks are always looking at me like, why do you say that? That's because I am actually in the later stages of my career. I have learned so much, and I think sometimes when you are mid-professional to later stage professional, that people think that there's no growth opportunity, that there's no need for professional development, and that's absolutely not true. There's still so much that I need to learn and so much that I need to understand, and I am growing in my leadership in this space. And again, I haven't worked in government. I'm not a long-time government employee. So with this being my first foray into government in my current role at Cook County, in me feeling confident enough to say that I'm a researcher, because I am a researcher, that I have research aims and that I can lead research projects, and I understand how to navigate all types of research, but that I have a specialty. And that in itself is just been so affirming. And I needed it more than I knew I needed it. So I am forever grateful for the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, seeing something special in me, seeing something special in this opportunity, in this story that I wanted to tell, and giving me the opportunity to do it in the way that I wanted to do it, with some guidance, of course, and I appreciate that. I am never above reproach, so I appreciate having the opportunity to learn and be redirected and be challenged and be heard. It's just been such a affirming, restorative experience. And so if you have a research idea, if there is some research that's been done by a previous Benton Opportunity Fund Fellow that you're interested in continuing or challenging, I encourage you to apply for this fellowship experience and hope that if you're selected, it provides you with as much joy, as many tools, as many opportunities for learning and expression that it has for me. So a special shout out, of course, to one of my favorites, Adrian Furness, now retired, chairman of the board of Benton, Revati Prasad, who is now the new executive there and doing a fabulous job, to Caroline Stratton, who took over the reins of our fellowship experience. I really appreciate your keen research eye, especially around references and citations, which is just not one of my strong suits for sure. So a lesson learned for me is I gotta always have me a good editor around, because my goodness, in the academic spaces, there's such formulaic reference making and citation making, and I need a little support there. And to Kevin Tagline, Kevin's a great editor, my goodness. So all of the things that make it onto the Benton site have to go through a rigorous editing process, and Kevin has provided a lot of direction and thought-provoking questions, especially around policy-related statements. Now, I'm running the policy for Cook County as it pertains to digital equity. I sit on the policy and practice team, but no one's really asked me, how did I learn how to do policy? And to be honest, I've been doing policy for a long time. I just didn't know that it was policy. So this experience has provided me some training, some reflection, some thought leadership, and really has helped to provide the necessary tools for me to be able to evolve the policy programming that I'm responsible for at the county, but also to use my brain and curiosity and love of maps and love of data to stand up now some research-based frameworks and opportunities for inquiry that sit at the research level. So yes, I am the Director of Digital Equity at Cook County Government in the Office of President Tony Pretwinkle, which is amazing, and I'm so thankful to be there and to be among all of my team members and work on behalf of the county and at the behest of President Tony Pretwinkle. But I am also Kyla Williams Tate, researcher, digital equity and AI policy strategist, art enthusiast and advocate. This experience has helped to boost my confidence to accept labels about myself and titles about myself that I don't think I otherwise would have adopted. So speaking of adoption, digital adoption, let's get into this episode. Again, shout out to Benton for all that you are and all that you've been to me in this time. Thank you again. So episode 10 is entitled, From Stories to Systems, Lessons, Reckonings, and the Road Ahead. So as I said, this is our final episode, a season that has carried us from history to hope, from the wounds of systemic exclusion to the possibilities of collective repair. Over the past 9 episodes, and that's right, there's 9 of these before this one, we've explored the forces that shape digital equity and inequity in communities formed by the Great Migration. Today, I am going to bring all of that together, revisiting the key recommendations from each episode and sharing one last recommendation that I believe can carry this work forward. Then, I'll close with some reflections on what it's meant to do this research and to live this research. But before that, I want to return us to episode 1 where it all started, and I shared my grandmother Clara's migration story. So where I left y'all in episode 1 was in 1954. My grandmother went back to Mississippi to get her 4 kids, including my mother, and then returned to Chicago. They lived primarily on the west side of Chicago because during that time, the Chicago Housing Authority had started to build housing developments, affordable housing developments, better known as the projects, on the west side of Chicago. And so my grandmother was able to move into a few of those during this time and take care of her children in the best ways that she could. So on the west side of Chicago, they lived primarily in two neighborhoods, Lawndale, which is now a North Lawndale and a South Lawndale, and then Garfield Park, which is now East Garfield Park as well as West Garfield Parks. Neighborhoods that even today score among the lowest on our Cook County Digital Equity Map. And if you haven't had an opportunity to visit our Digital Equity Map, the Cook County Digital Equity Map, I encourage you to do so. There's good information, there's good methodology on how we came up with the numbers, and certainly we would love if folks were interested in replicating that in some way and giving us a little bit of credit for being an inspiration point behind that. Now, later in life, after the kids grew up and moved out and did their own thing, my grandmother moved to some Cook County suburban communities. So she left the city because the city had gotten too expensive, wasn't as safe as she wanted, and she really wanted a more quiet life and more opportunities for the children that she had after my mother and those other three that came with her. She wanted better opportunity for them because she was able to see what a struggle it was for those first set of kids. And then she had the second set of kids and she wanted better for them, similar to why she came to Chicago in the first place. So she moved to Harvey, Illinois. And based on our Cook County Digital Equity Map, Harvey, Illinois right now has a digital equity score of 12 out of 100. She then moved to Dixmoor, and Dixmoor has a digital equity score right now of 25 out of 100. Then she moved to Markham, and Markham, Illinois has a digital equity score of 28. And then she moved to Chicago Heights, which also has a digital equity score of 28. Finally, as dementia set in, she moved from Chicago Heights to Decatur to live with my uncle, where she remained until she passed away in 2018. Now, when you line up all of those scores, a pattern starts to form. The neighborhoods my grandmother called home, all places where she raised her family and worked hard, really, really hard, because she cleaned houses, because she didn't have any formal education, she didn't have any skills. So she cleaned houses for a living and was working hard doing that. But those places map perfectly, almost perfectly, to the lowest scoring areas in Cook County for broadband access, device ownership, and digital competence. Even as she moved into the suburban area seeking more opportunity, the systems around her, economic and digital alike, even at that time, remained unequal. The maps may have changed. So again, her neighborhoods were called something else in Chicago, and now in the city of Chicago 77 neighborhood map, they're called something else. So the maps may have changed, but those barriers, the barriers stayed consistent. So to understand that reality, I turned to another data set, the Opportunity Atlas. Have y'all heard about the Opportunity Atlas? It was created by Raj Chetty. He's a William A. Ackman Professor of Economics at Harvard University and Director of Opportunity Insights. Now, the Atlas uses big data to study the science of economic opportunity and asks one essential question. How can we give children from all backgrounds better chances of succeeding? And I love that question because it incorporates equity. It's inclusive of equity. It doesn't say equity, but it means equity. So in that research, economic mobility is measured as adult household income at age 35 for children who grew up in a specific census tract. So in plain language, that means it tells us how much your neighborhood impacts your future and whether the promise of opportunity holds true. Now, when I compare the economic mobility data from my grandmother's neighborhoods to those that she left behind in the Mississippi Delta, Greenwood, Itabena, and other small places, Black Hawk and Carroll County, the results were both fascinating and equally heartbreaking. On paper, my grandmother moving north improved her proximity to opportunity. It did. On Chicago's west side, neighborhoods like Lawndale and Garfield Park, the median incomes have risen modestly over the last 5 years, hovering in the mid $30,000 range. But those areas are still considered low mobility zones where children from low-income families tend to remain in low-income households as adults. So you grow up poor and you remain poor until you leave this earth. That is what this data set is revealing. Now, that was the Chicago story. When my grandmother moved into suburban Cook County, and this is the south suburbs specifically, which is where I live, in the south suburbs, the story is a little more mixed. Harvey and Dixmoor sit around $40,000 in median household income, still below the county averages, while Markham and Chicago Heights, depending on which portion of those communities you reside in, are closer to $50,000 and $57,000, shows slightly higher upward mobility. So when I compared those numbers to the Mississippi towns my grandmother left behind, I found something really sobering. Greenwood, Mississippi's median income sits around $34,000. Itabena at about $32,000. And I got my MBA from Mississippi Valley State University in Itabena. And Black Hawk, Carroll County, it's a little more spread because it's counting the county. The median income is near $55,000, though there may be a little bit of variety in there. What these numbers suggest is that both the North and the South, the promise of upward mobility for Black families still remains constrained by geography, policy, and infrastructure. So to further interpret this, I look to two additional frameworks to help me, understand the intersection of place, opportunity, and digital access. Now, the first framework I looked at was the social determinants of economic mobility framework. It builds on the idea that economic outcomes are shaped by the conditions where people live, work, learn, and connect. That means broadband access and digital skills, even trust in technology function, much like health determinants. They predict who can advance and who gets left behind. The second framework that I took a look at was the digital capital framework, which defines digital capital as the combination of access, skills, and tangible outcomes derived from technology use. When applied to migration and mobility, it helps us to explain why some families can leverage digital tools for opportunity, while others facing systemic barriers cannot. And I think that that's important to say. I think we have to be more truthful in saying that if systemic barriers, systemic injustice, systemic disinvestment exist as part of your family's storyline, and that stuff is still occurring very readily today, it is going to prevent you from being able to take advantage of all of the tools of opportunity: digital, health, education, mental health, all of that. When we overlay both frameworks, the social determinants of mobility and digital capital, a clearer picture does emerge. My grandmother's move north did improve the family's physical safety and educational access, in a way. Also offered a little bit more access to healthcare, but that was even very limited and continues to be a challenge even today. But the neighborhoods where she lived were structurally limited in both economic and digital capital. So in other words, the same forces that restricted wealth building, redlining, underinvestment, and disinvestment back then have shaped digital inclusion activities, and more so the exclusion of participation in the digital society today. So the question bears itself to ask: was my grandmother better off staying in Mississippi? Economically, perhaps not by much, but context matters, because staying in the South meant surviving under Jim Crow, while moving north meant seeking dignity and possibility. And let's be real, we are certainly grateful that she made that move north, because that's how my mother met my father, and that's how I got here. So we like that. But her story, like so many others from the Great Migration, reminds us that migration is more than movement. It is a form of resistance, a declaration that even when the systems fail to see us, we will find a way to be seen. I love that. So restoring. So now let's revisit the lessons from this season. I see my grandmother's journey. I'm getting choked up. I see her journey reflected in every episode. The courage to move, the will to adapt, and the ongoing fight to belong. So let's go with all of the recommendations. And here's a little bit of a recap. Recommendation number 1, storytelling as a bridge. We began this storytelling series with my grandmother's journey north, a story that is also a data point. Storytelling bridges gaps by raising awareness, fostering understanding, and building empathy across communities. It turns the statistics of the divide into something that we can see and feel and act on. Recommendation number 2, leadership at every level. From neighborhood pastors to county CIOs, leadership at every level is non-negotiable in this work. Without sustained leaders driving accountability and action, technology will continue bypassing the people who need it the most. Recommendation number 3, partnering with Black churches. And again, we can say holistically partnering with churches because of the active audience that they have there, the captive and active audience that they have there. But for the purposes of this research project, it's about partnering with Black churches, because that's what the Black people is, okay? Like the church basements that doubled as job centers during the migration, Black churches today remain trusted hubs. Now, we know that there's a lot of church hurt going on, and there's a lot of other things that happen in churches that keep people from being there, but they still remain open and pretty full every Sunday and several times during the week. So I would say that they are institutionally still trusted hubs. We need deeper partnerships with faith communities and coalitions like the Black Churches for Digital Equity to reach those who are often left out of formal outreach. Cook County is the second largest county in the nation. Despite my best efforts, despite me and my colleague Mauricio Jimenez doing our best, but despite our best efforts in building up the Digital Equity Action Committee and our Council of Digital Equity, we just are not going to be able to reach every corner of the county. And the church can help us to reach more people because of their institutional community-based status. Recommendation number 4, digital equity in economic strategy. We saw places in Leimert Park in California that I talked about a couple of episodes back, that culture and commerce are inseparable. Economic development tables must include digital equity subject matter experts, because if we're building for the future, without broadband in the plan, without digital skills, without confidence building, without access, and I'm not just talking about being able to get it, but being able to get it in the way that you need to get it, because maybe you're differently able, disabled, or just was systemically disinvested and missed a couple of things. We have to do that in concert with economic development and mobility planning. If we are not doing that, we're building on sand, and it's not going to stand up, okay? Number 5, policy change for lasting impact. Recommendation 5 is policy change for lasting impact. So in cities like Cleveland, informal networks thrive because formal systems failed. Today, policy is the lever that can change those systems. Affordable internet, community-led digital literacy programs. They don't happen without elected officials feeling the pressure to legislate for equity. I am so thankful that I have a very intentional leader here in Cook County, President Toni Preckwinkle, who has prioritized this body of work as part of her policy platform for the county. I sit in the president's office, the highest office of the highest elected official in the county. My work sits there because it's that important. So we need more President Toni Preckwinkles out there, more county leadership, more city leadership, more state leadership speaking out boldly, confidently about the need for this type of work and support and resources for it. Recommendation number 6, naming racism, calling it what it is, and building hubs to help to educate to others to be anti-racist. So we can't close the divide without naming systemic racism as a root cause. I know people don't want to talk about it. I know it makes people feel very uncomfortable. I know there are people who are saying, why is she always talking about Black things? Because I'm a Black person, and I'm not narcissistic. I'm a Black person who grew up, and I have seen what disparity exists. And I am one of a few who have been able to traverse into a different economic status because of access to education, because my parents were very intentional on trying to change the narrative for my life and my siblings' life. So we have to call out racism. We can't be afraid to say this is racist practice. We have to stand up anti-racist education in our communities, because we are naming systemic racism as a root cause for poverty, for social inequity, for access to digital growth opportunities. Systemic racism is a root cause. That's why community-based digital hubs with anti-racist programming are essential as the fiber in the ground, because it doesn't matter if you put it in the ground or a satellite in the sky if the root cause for access isn't addressed, and those very people are denied the opportunity to participate in that tool, in that fiber line. If they can't afford to get internet, then how does having internet benefit them or benefit society equitably? Now I'm getting upset. I gotta calm down. Recommendation number 7, seeing libraries as digital navigators. Now, I am directly taking this recommendation and putting it into policy practice at Cook County Digital Equity. So we have the Chicago Public Library Cyber Navigator Program. We have small town branches and libraries that are doing navigator type of work, but they're more than just access points. They are trusted guides, digital navigators who can expand skills, strengthen infrastructure, and create sustainable pathways to opportunity. We are evolving the digital navigator model, which is typically based on the individual, and we are evolving that to an institutional digital navigator model. So seeing libraries as digital navigators and essential to the access to skills and tools for technology and digital participation is the systems change and policy priority that we are unearthing and discovering. We're working with Reaching Across Illinois Library Systems, RAILS for short, as well as a guiding team of library professionals who are helping us to figure out what does that mean. I'm so excited. We launched that program last month and we are moving it forward. So if you're interested in learning more about libraries as digital navigators, the Digital Navigator Network is what we call it officially, please continue to check our website where we'll be sharing out more information. Check Rails' website. They will also be sharing information. This project is going to be, I think, a key in actually helping us to incrementally move that digital equity, digital inclusion needle forward. Real impact. I believe this is one of those things that's going to really help us address digital equity in a systemic way. I'm so excited about this project. Recommendation 8 was around rebuilding trust through care. Access alone is not enough. We have to repair trust, combining digital literacy with cultural competence and care. A functional device means little if the user doesn't feel respected or safe while learning. Recommendation number 9 was moving from being user-centered to community-owned design of tools. In episode 9, we imagined a Community Tech Standards Bureau, a way to publicly rate and certify tools for equity, privacy, and accessibility. Now, Kevin asked me in this blog post that will support this last episode, well, who's responsible for that? Who's going to do that? I'm still working on figuring out what that looks like, but I think it's a collaborative of government, community, and the philanthropic sector, I would say. Some kind of way there needs to be a body or something, similar to like the Better Business Bureau, something that sits independent of government, preferably, and has accountability built into it, so that we can remove or move from designing for to designing with, and from testing on communities to co-creating with communities from day one. I just love this idea. I love this framing, and I'm working on it. Community Tech Standards Bureau. If you're interested in joining me on this journey, get in contact with me because I am working on it. And then episode 10, final recommendation 10, is a national digital equity accountability framework. Now, I've been in this work for a long time. Some of y'all know me from my Smart Chicago days when I was doing BTOP work, the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, work with the city of Chicago. Even prior to BTOP, I was doing work in Kankakee and teaching seniors how to use technology, writing curriculum and training manuals. So I've been in this work for a very long time. There's been investments federally, county, city, philanthropy. Like, what's the full story? What's the full story? I believe it's time that we create this National Digital Equity Accountability Framework. And that's where I really wanted to end this series, and where we all can begin again into the next journeys of some of these recommendations. We need this national accountability framework, one that tracks commitments, measures progress, and has some consequences when promises to close the divide are broken. Like, I understand that enforceability on broken promises in government and lawmakers, and I understand that that's a tall order. But how else are we going to be able to say that we're not getting our needs met, or that there's been investment in places that didn't need that kind of investment? How are we going to be able to right size that story and course correct if there's not this kind of longitudinal space where information lives and can be analyzed and aggregated so that it helps to make better informed data decisions? And that's what a national digital equity accountability framework will do. Super excited about that. Also moving that forward. But I wanted to reference it, preference it, and attribute it here first. A national digital equity accountability framework. If we are serious about closing the digital divide, and I've been in this work for a long time, because I can tell you I ain't stopped saying the same thing I was saying 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. My story hasn't changed. I'm telling the same story because the conditions still remain. If we are serious about closing the digital divide, we must make accountability as non-negotiable as access itself. Full stop. And as the young girls say, period. So those are the 10 recommendations. They live on my website, thedigitaldeterminants.com, which has all of the recommendations listed. And I'll be talking a little bit later on in this episode about something that's coming up as it pertains to the body of those recommendations. So now I just want to take a little bit of time to reflect on the fellowship journey, like, my story in this fellowship journey. So during this research, enduring this research has been both an intellectual pursuit. I've gotten smarter. I just have. And it's been a deeply personal journey. I've gotten even more emotional as a result. So I got smarter and I got more emotional. It is one thing, to study the migration of millions of Black Americans who left the South in search of freedom and opportunity. It's another to recognize that your own family made that same journey, and that the systemic barriers that they faced then are still visible in the policies and the conditions we live in today. Again, my grandmother passed away in 2018. She lived a long life. And yes, there's been some change. There's been some growth. There's been some evolution. But those systemic conditions, they are still there. They are still very much there. I don't have to go far. Right here in my own home. Right here in my own community. Right here in my own family. Right here in my own place of employment. It's still present. This season, I learned more about my own family's migration story, one that I just never thought to ask my grandmother about, interestingly enough. She never really talked about it either, which to me was a sign that maybe there was some pain there, and I didn't want my grandmother to talk about those painful things. I really wanted to root our relationship in joy and laughter, and it certainly had a lot of that in there. Joy, laughter, and God, because my grandmother loved her some Jesus, y'all. But learning about my own family's migration story And with it, this unshakable awareness of how systemic inequities reproduce themselves. Generational curse. They call it a curse, but it's a generational strategy. Because if you don't address the root causes that got this generation there, then what makes you think that subsequent generations are going to be able to just do something totally different? I think that that's foolish to think that. What's happening federally around policy feels familiar to me at the DNA level. Let me say that again. What's happening currently federally around policy, it feels familiar at the DNA level. When you cut off SNAP benefits, something that kept my mother and her siblings alive and pseudo-healthy, not by much, but just enough to keep them okay. I feel that on a DNA level. When my family members can't afford to rent an apartment or buy a house because their income is not enough to do that, I feel that on a DNA level. It echoes policies of decades past. Hospitals closing in underserved areas, schools shutting their doors, and a growing question in my mind. Will libraries be next? Are they trying to dismantle IMLS and ultimately come for our community hubs, our libraries? College enrollment numbers are strong. And I think that's because jobs are not available or folks don't have the skills to go and get the jobs. But without grant funding and with student loans becoming even more predatory and loan forgiveness and everything that is entailing, we are headed towards just another economic crash, I believe, of some sorts. Maybe not the full economic, society crashing, but things are going to start falling apart economically speaking. Now, I'm not an economist. There's other folks who have better storytelling and articulation around economic issues. But I'm also a very instinctual person, and my gut is telling me that something is going to happen.